All right, AP US History, it's Mr. Celez here. I wanted to give you a review, an overview video, if you will, for the test coming up this week. We have two tests. You have the STAAR EOC test for US History, and then on Friday, May 5th in the morning, we have our AP US History exam. So here's how I want to do things. I kind of want to go over an overview of each test, and then I'm going to get into the content, because the content is on both tests. We know that STAAR only involves the second semester, more recent U.S. history, post-Civil War. But I'm going to kind of go through start to finish, because by the time I get to that part of the curriculum for AP, I'm going to be covering both. So I'm going to kind of use this from an AP perspective. I'm going to go from period 1 all the way up to today. I'm not covering every single detail in this video. I just want to hit some of the major points and themes that you want to be able to do. I do also want to make note of what I've given you on the class website, on the hub. So if you want to follow along, or we're looking this up later, remember, you have access to last semester, okay, U.S. History A, semester 1, and then obviously we've been on U.S. History B, semester 2, for all the content. We'll be uploading all the review presentations that y'all put together for all 13 of the eras that I classified. We'll have one from each class. You have double. If you don't like one, you have the other. And then you have the stuff I put. I'll tell you the same thing I'm telling my seniors. You are not going to go from day one to the end, and you can do that, but you're not going to gain anything from it. It's not going to stick in your head. So you have to be very precise in your studying, okay? You have to look at what your true weaknesses are. Some of you know right away which units you are stronger at or weaker at. If you're not sure, if you go into the U.S. STAAR review folder, okay, there's two ways you can target where you are weaker at. For STAAR, you have that whole packet that we went through. If you lost the packet, I put each individual day, all 10 days, up on there with the answer key to check yourself. Look at what you did, and obviously, ones that you did weaker at, look at your score each one. See how many you got wrong on the vocab and questions, and then put them in order of the one that you missed the most down to the missed the least, and start in that order. If you get down to number 10, the one you did the best at, great. But it's no loss if you don't. You want to start with those ones that you missed the most at and try and do that. So that's for STAAR. You can also use another method, and I've put 2 full-length practice STAAR exams up on that same folder, the STAAR review folder, with the answer keys. So if you take those exams, I would recommend the 2015 one. 2013 we'll do a lot in class of, and score yourself, okay? I don't care about your score. I want you to instead go back to the things you got wrong, no matter how many you got wrong. Okay, whether it's only 5 or whether it's 50, okay? Go back to what you got wrong and label what the topic was or the term was for each of those wrong questions. And then put that in a big list, bam, you just created your study list. And go and look at those individual things. I'm not asking you to go through all those review presentations, and for AP, for example, look at all 13 presentations. You don't need to. Go to the ones that you are the weakest at, and let's be very strategic and precise on how we go about this, all right? You'll also notice, separate from that folder, I've put up what it's labeled as a push exam review, and it's a massive document I put together. Once again, you can break down. It goes in chronological order, but it's a study guide, basically, for each and every single unit. It starts off with the major questions and themes of each unit you want to make sure you're aware of, and I'm going to pull that up, actually, as we talk about a push. And then it has the vocab. And usually I think I broke it down each one by people and places and events and other things like that. These are good, what I call just good old-fashioned checklist. You can use these documents to scan through. I guarantee you that you can probably cross off, put a check by well over 2/3 of the stuff that's on there, because it just comes to you. Oh yeah, I know that. I know what the Declaration of Independence is. I know what the War of 1812 was. I know, you know that stuff. Once again, highlight the stuff you don't know, and now you got a study list. Okay, so all are very useful in preparing and doing this. Okay, format of 2 tests. STAAR test, we are straight multiple choice. For the first time this year, it is exclusively on the computer, and we talked about the testing browser on there. You have the same ability to do things you do on paper. You can eliminate and cross out answers, which I'm telling you to do. You can highlight parts of questions. You can physically write and underline. You can make your own notes on there. All right, just make sure you're very methodical about it. What's great about STAAR, the time's not a factor. It says it's a 4-hour test. I know it ain't going to take you 4 hours, but it should take you more than just an hour. Okay, take your time. Now, there's a curse to that too. You don't want to sit there forever. If you can't get a question within a minute or two, move on and come back to it. The worst thing that you can do is sit there and rack your mind and be not sure about something for 5, 6, 7 minutes. Now you're getting tired. Now you're getting frustrated. And now you're going to make a silly mistake on the next question because you frustrated yourself on that. Move at a nice, methodical pace, but that doesn't mean you have to answer every question on that pace. So it's okay to skip it, or on the online browser, you're allowed to mark it for review, and they'll put a flag by it, and at the end that I need to go back to that before I hit submit. Before you hit submit, you better make sure that you tell your proctor so they can double check you're good, and you'll be good to go. Make sure that computer, because you're using your computer, is charged the night before, and bring your charger with you just in case. Clear out anything else. Only have the computer in your case, and that's it. Okay, you don't need to bring anything else to the testing room, and you can't. Okay. All right. Okay, let's contrast that. The format for AP US History, we know, is very, very different. It is a time test. Time is a big factor. And it's a multiple part test. Unlike the other AP tests, like I was just talking with the seniors with government economics, it's just part 1, part 2. We have 4 really distinct parts. Now, they say section 1, part A and B, and section 2, part A and B, but I see this 4 distinct parts. Okay, number 1, and this is 40% of the exam, is your traditional multiple choice. Okay, we have our multiple choice. And remember, it's only 4 answer choices, which is nice. When we look at the other AP tests, like AP Government, you're going to have 5 answer choices. This only goes A, B, C, and D, and that does not go into a letter choice E. We have 55 questions in 55 minutes, which I love because it keeps you on a nice, even pace. Okay, you got a minute a question. Yes, I get it. Some questions you'll know right away and answer it in 10 seconds. But use that minute rule because, like I said, if you read something all the way through, all the answers, and it's been more than a minute, okay, move on, come back. Because you're going to gain time back because other questions will only take you a matter of seconds to answer. Also, just to be thorough, even if you get down to, let's say, answer choice B or C, some people don't tell you to. I do recommend keep reading, okay? Maybe circle the answer, okay, or maybe mark the answer. I think that's the right answer. But still make sure and make sure you can eliminate D and E. I'm not trying to make it harder on yourself. I'm just saying it puts your mind at ease that you didn't, catch. Maybe you didn't catch something. Maybe you thought it was C, but that's a trick. Okay, let's make sure we're thorough and read our way through it. Okay, they're going to appear in sets. Okay, you'll on the STAAR test, you'll see individual maps or a cartoon or a quote that goes with maybe one question or a couple questions. AP is set up, we're going to see in sets of anywhere from 2 to 5 questions involving what they call a data set. Okay, it's going to be 2 or 5 questions around a particular extended quote, or around a map, or around a primary source, or whatever it may be. You're going to see primary source text and quotes, and remember, you got to get in the mindset for what you're reading. That's where you need to really mark up, look at keywords, pick up what you can do, what you can understand, not understand. Same thing on images and graphs, okay? Those are all going to be included as the prompts for that, okay? On section 1, part B, so I call it section 2, we got our 4 short answer. And that makes up another 20% of the test. Now we're up to 60%. You have 50 minutes for these 4 questions. So, you look about 12 minutes, right? A little more, about 12 and a half minutes per question. We've been practicing. You see this on tests. They're usually like an A, B, and C. Each one being, since if you were to take it out, it'd be about a paragraph or so in length. So you're doing about 4 paragraphs. These are on precise individual topics. They can still involve breaking down or analyzing a text or an image or a graph or something like that, or they may not. It may just involve just a general, just without a prompt. They just say, hey, and you see some of these on my test about, compare and contrast this or that. This is where you'll be able to get into details about, they want to know, can you give actual examples? You're going to be asked to give historical examples of things, to be able to put some of those basic skills to analyze, to compare and contrast, to conceptualize, and some of the basic things. So once again, you want to pace yourself on that. Next, you have our DBQ. And the DBQ is at 25% of the test, which brings us up to a total of 85% now. Our DBQ is only 1 question. You have 55 minutes on it, okay? I break it down like this. You should take a minimum of 15 to 20 minutes to actually just work on the actual sources. I'd reserve a half hour to just go to town writing. If you get more time, great. All right. But I think you need at least 15, 20 minutes you need to go through each source. Remember, you have to use all but one. Okay. You want to read the question. You want to understand what your argument's going to be. You may not have a thesis in mind yet, but that's why you need to go through the sources. You want to look at each source. You want to make notes out to the side. What is this source about? How can I label it? How can I classify it? So you can group sources together and use them together on an argument. And then look at the whole list you've created, and let's look at how we can make an argument out of it. Okay, you're going to have to analyze a lot of different types of data, primary and secondary sources, and it's going to be argument based. Can you take a stand, historical argument, and justify it, more importantly, with examples? In this case, they're giving you the examples. Flip that with the final part of the test, which is 15%, and it's your long essay. I call it a free response, an FRQ. Okay, you have two choices. You'll select one out of the two, and you will have to explain and analyze some significant issue in U.S. history. This is usually where they like to do stuff like change over time. You saw this on our most recent Cold War test, where I said, analyze the changing role of the United States in the world, in world politics from 1945 to 1980, and then you got to use specific examples. They don't give you the examples now. So it's just like a DBQ. You're making an argument or a stand, but now you're pulling the sources from your head and your memory and what you know. Versus on DBQ, they are making you use whichever sources that they're doing. One other thing that I'll mention, and you want to be aware of, and we'll talk about it in class, is that we've only had this new AP test for a couple of years now, but on College Board, on AP Central, which I'll show you in class, or I've shown you in class, they have the last 2 years of the writing. So you can see the DBQ from the last 2 years, along with student sample answers. You can see the FRQ, you can see the short answers. You can see everything except for the multiple choice. And so that'll help. Remember, we have distinct periods. We have period 1, which was exploration and colonization. Period 2, which was the colonies before the revolution. Period 3, the revolutionary period, and then that first, era of government up to the election of Thomas Jefferson. Period 4, the first major part of our country's history, from 1800 to 1848 to the end of the Mexican-American War. Period 5, which overlaps 1844 to 1877. That's really hitting at that issue of slavery and the events leading up to the Civil War, the actual Civil War, and Reconstruction. 1865 to 1898, that westward expansion, Gilded Age. So now we get to period 5 into 6. We're now into material that's not just AP, but it's also on STAAR, because that starts with Gilded Age and westward expansion. That also includes the Progressive Era and cleaning up things. And then finally, imperialism, 1898 being the start of the Spanish-American War and the United States joining the global scene. We have 1890 to 1945, which overlaps again, but it's focused on the changing role of the United States. So within that, we have the Spanish-American War, we have World War I, a little bit more progressive era stuff, the 1920s, the Roaring '20s, Great Depression, New Deal, and then ending with World War II. We then have period 8, which is 1945 to 1980. That's the Cold War. And out of the Cold War, both in terms of what's happening at home, domestically, and foreignly. And then period 9, which is very small, and we didn't really mention, we didn't do something separate on. I kind of rolled it into period 8, is 1980 to the present, up to through your lifetime. And I'm talked about some of the major roles. If you look at day 10 of that STAAR review sheet, it hits on some of the major events for that. Some of the skills that we got to be able to do, right? We got to be able to analyze evidence. That's our sourcing, primary, secondary sources, interpretation, comparison, contextualization, be able to realize the significance of something and how it fits into the story of our history. Synthesis, put stuff together into one clear argument. Causation, so what causes things, the patterns or change over time. Periodization, and see how it's a major shift. So being able to understand and explain, why is it a big deal? What's going on? We end Reconstruction in 1877 and move forward. What's the big deal? Or what's the big deal with 1945? The United States during World War II versus the United States that emerges after World War II. And then argumentation, another skill, being able to take a stand and argue that. So going through the AP Push exam review, I just want to mention a couple things that stood out to me as I went through this. And let me just pull it up real fast. It's a lot of people get intimidated by APUSH because it's such a huge amount of history. And it is a lot, okay? You're not going to know everything. Look, I don't care how smart you are. You're going to encounter something on that test that you haven't heard. Whoa, what is this? I haven't heard this before. Okay. It's all right because you have the skills and abilities to make an educated guess, to really get around it and look at the other clues, the context clues, etc. You do, trust me. As you go through that APUSH exam study guide, I've broken down, like I said, essential questions, in a nutshell, which is basically me putting the summary points, and then the key terms. Okay, so I just want to hit on a few major themes, and then we'll kind of that'll be it for this general video. For precise questions, you need to come in for review sessions. We'll be dividing the week between obviously focus on STAAR Tuesday, focus on APUSH Thursday, and then my review sessions on each of those days will reflect those tests as well. During exploration colonization, we want to be able to make sure we understand the motivations for Europeans, the major players in the game when it came to exploring, the differences in how colonies developed, let's say, in what became the 13 colonies, English colonies versus Spanish colonies, for example, in Latin America, and so on. We want to get into the early colonies, how they were set up, the types of colonies, major leaders, the reasons for those colonies existing, and kind of their success. We then want to get into what is pushing the colonies towards revolution. What are those factors? After the war itself, we want to be able to look into the forming of this country. Who were the key players? Kind of what was the major theme there. One of the big areas we want to look at is really those early 1800s. It gets passed over. And that's us emerging as a country. So being put to the test for a second time against Great Britain in the War of 1812, really our own doing, pushing that war. And the early presidents of that era, once you get past Jefferson and we become a much larger country, we have the Louisiana Purchase under Jefferson, and we start to expand. We see the start of that idea, manifest destiny. We see the start of American industry, the start of American identity, the start of slavery becoming an issue, okay? And leading up to Andrew Jackson, we have some pivotal elections, including the controversial election that Jackson lost and was decided by Congress. And then we want to shift into kind of full on how we just start with sectionalism, how we start to become different in the South and Western frontier and the industrial North, and how that contributes to the building tensions in the late 1800s leading up towards the Civil War and the causes of that. Civil War itself, its causes, the major players, Reconstruction, okay, how that was set up, why it ends and when it ends, okay, stuff like that. We then want to look at westward expansion, like I said, the Gilded Age. We want to look at, obviously, there's two phases. I see the Gilded Age as creating problems, right? It's a boom time. The reason we call it gilded is because it looks good on the cover. It's all nice and golden, but on the inside, it's not pure gold. That's the idea of robber barons and how not everyone's coming out rich and wealthy. Well, if that's the creating the problems, the progressive era is creating the solutions. So that's a big cause and effect, putting those two side by side. Here's the problem, here's the effect, and here's how we solve it in the progressive era. You then want to start, especially by the progressive era, start seeing the emerging role of race relations again, post-Civil War. So that journey of civil rights. Remember, it's 100 years from 1865, the end of the Civil War, to 1965 and the Voting Rights Act, that this journey, if you will, of going from slavery to true equality is a 100-year saga. The Roaring Twenties and how that contributes to the Great Depression. Remember, I compared the 20s to the 1980s, so that's what we're talking about, periodization. Seeing the parallels between that. The World Wars and how they both changed and didn't change the role of the United States in the world. World War I, Woodrow Wilson tried to change our role, but it didn't work out. First, after World War II, there's no doubt that we're going to be leader in the world. Great Depression, FDR, okay. And then a lot of the Cold War stuff we've done forward. I want to fast forward. One of the things I didn't talk as much about was looking at current affairs. And one of the things that we want to make sure we're clear on. So Cold War, we got Korea, we have Vietnam, we have what goes on domestically, we have civil rights. When we get to the 1980s and into the 90s, when we're talking about Reagan's presidency in the 1980s, the rise of the modern Republican Party, modern conservatism. In the 90s, we want to know, here's a couple things you want to know. You want to know the presidents, Okay, kind of how they were elected. So George H.W. Bush, then Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and then obviously the big one being Obama, as being the first African American president. And next, you want to know how our role, because it's kind of a continuation of the Cold War. Remember, the Cold War ends in the 1980s. There's no more Soviet Union. And the shift goes from our big enemy or nemesis in the world being communism, which we've been talking about communism since Russia became communist in 1917, right? That part of U.S. history, that's all we talked about. The Red Scare twice, McCarthyism, we're freaking out in the Cold War. It now shifts to terrorism in the 1990s. And then specifically in the 1990s and leading up to 9/11, Islamic extremist terrorism. And 9/11 being the defining moment that really we call the war on terror. Then directly puts us into conflicts in Afghanistan, and we get involved in Iraq. Just like you would say that communism got us involved in Korea and Vietnam, terrorism is getting us involved in Afghanistan and Iraq. So that's the big thing you want to know. Let's see, what other things? NAFTA, which is something that's been challenged today by the Trump presidency, but NAFTA in the 90s was the North American Free Trade Agreement, which creates zero barriers to trade, or almost zero barriers between Canada, United States, and Mexico. That's why they're our number one and number two trading partners. The controversial election of 2000, so how Al Gore got more votes, but George W. Bush won the Electoral College, so therefore became president. And that's pretty much the main stuff. There's a few things we may mention, or I may mention the final days, but that's the main big things. Like I said, there's not a lot. There'll be more as the years go on, obviously, about this time period. But because the test is not going, I don't think it's going to focus too much on your present lifetime. Even on the STAAR test, your present lifetime, it really talks about the impact of the world you're living in. So the impact of technology, computers, cell phones, communication, globalization, how the world's come together. They're really big concept questions. You're not getting really specific, what is this term or this person type questions like you would get historically. I know this is a very broad overview, but hopefully this helped just a little bit to put things into perspective and keep things straight. I encourage you to, both in class and at the review sessions, come in and ask me questions. This is the big week. Let's get through it. Take it one day at a time. STAAR on Wednesday. A-Push exam on Friday morning at 8 o'clock. Now, remember, A-Push will be on paper, but please be on time at 8 o'clock or before 8 o'clock in your testing room, and we'll be able to get going. So we'll be able to take your time. All right. If you have any questions, please put a comment. Email me at stelez1@houstonisd.org. Bring your questions to class. Bring your questions to a review session. But I want to help you get through this. Like I said, one day at a time, and we'll do it. Remember, the more you put forth on STAAR and the test for Wednesday, the better off you are for A-Push. You're studying half the minute. Yes, I get it. You just have to do multiple choice on STAAR, and it's not as hard as A-Push. I get that. But the vast majority of the content, the material, if you're thoroughly going over it for STAAR, you don't have to then all of a sudden when that test is over Wednesday go, okay, I got to start all over for A-Push. No, you've already done what you got to do for STAAR, which is the second half of U.S. history. Now let's go back to the older stuff, okay? Let's go back to periods 1 through 5. Let's go back to exploration, the revolution, the colonies. Let's go back to slavery and the Civil War. And let's add that into our working knowledge. They are two separate tests, but they're both U.S. history. So let's use the studying of one to help the other. Okay, hope this helped, guys. Thanks.